Hi, this is Rob Sheen from the Source Conference, and I'm here with Valery Berestetsky and Jonathan Schaaf from GE Healthcare, and they're going to be speaking at Source Austin on December 5th and 6th on medical device threat modeling with templates. So I'm really interested to hear about that because um, we've all heard a lot over the years recently about how medical devices in particular are, generally pretty vulnerable to security issues in some pretty devastating ways in a lot of cases. So I'm curious. Obviously, you came up with this, because you see some attack surface out there. What kinds of devices do you think are the most vulnerable um, in a medical environment?
I mean, most vulnerable and most dangerous are actually two different questions because something can be really vulnerable but not dangerous, or it can be
Right.
really dangerous but not as vulnerable. And I think we were more focused when we were doing on this more on the how dangerous is it, how big of a deal is it, than we were how vulnerable it is. And I mean, really, I think the main thing right now for how vulnerable devices are is literally how old they are. When you have a lot of unpatched, published vulnerabilities in your base operating system, your device is going to be very vulnerable. But something that emits, dangerous levels of ionizing radiation is very different than something that just records data.
Right. Now, you said something interesting, which is the level of vulnerability is usually equal to how old it is, which doesn't surprise me. Um, so, do you think we're actually getting better? Because I hear mixed things on whether or not people are actually changing their behaviors and not in how they're building things.
Well, there is definitely some movement in this area because people started to realize that the medical devices that are being widely used in the hospital environment need some review and assessing from the security standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Valeria on that too. I mean, I think the industry is improving. I mean, maybe not as rapidly as some people would like it to, but you know, just when I think about, if you look at a 10-year-old medical device, you're going to see a zillion open ports. I mean, it just wasn't even something people were paying attention to. And even just some very common sense basic work on the topic can go a long way. And I think our customers are asking us as a medical device manufacturer to secure our devices, and it's something that's getting a response. And I'm sure it's happening across the industry.
Got it.
Going back to your initial question about most vulnerable devices, what is most important in the when you assess the medical device security is to understand from the beginning what are you going to protect. If it's something relevant to patient safety, this is the most important thing. So regardless of the fact how old the device is, the and how vulnerable it is, we need to understand what are we protecting first.
Right. Now, why have folks historically struggled with threat modeling around medical devices, in your opinion?
So, a couple of things. I mean, when you look at the tools that are out there off the shelf to assist with threat modeling, they're much more centered on desktop applications or websites or network infrastructures. And definitely a medical device has all those things. I mean, there will be desktop applications in medical devices. They'll be cloud connected. There'll, be all kinds of different things. But especially if you try to incorporate some of the behavioral aspects of that device, like it's injecting a pharmaceutical or that it's, using ionizing radiation, those aren't things that normally come up with threat modeling tools. So it either needs to be a whiteboard exercise or you need to have a template which helps guide less experienced engineers to some of the uh, medical device specific security risks. And that's kind of what our work was centered around, was trying to sit down very carefully and analytically consider the risks of different kinds of devices and capture them in some templates that can be imported into tools that assist with the process.
To add to that, threat modeling exercise, regardless of the tool that you're using, is usually a twofold exercise. First, you need to describe your system one way or another, and that means to create some kind of a data flow diagram, some kind of a diagram of the system, a schematic representation of a system's architecture. And two, you have to have a threat framework to apply to this architecture and then analyze these threats to see how applicable they are and what can come out of them. So that combination of a architectural description and a threat framework is actually called a template in a tool that we've used for medical devices.
I see. So you've basically kind of customized the framework to basically kind of address some of those gaps that historically were there. Like Jonathan was saying, historically we focused on desktop apps or web apps, and so you've kind of adapted it to fit more of the use cases of the medical devices.
We extended it to the use cases of medical devices, and we used a specific tool capability of being to be extended to cover the areas that are not covered in the software applications.
Yeah, I mean, just to be really specific, when we looked at medical device components, we still considered, the typical STRIDE framework.
Mm-hmm.
But the two things we added in were patient safety and abuse potential. And I mean, it's nothing revolutionary, but I think that's probably the one big difference in what we did for medical devices than your typical framework for considering threats.
To add to that, we also looked into the actual STRIDE framework and evaluated how is it applicable for medical devices and updated applications of a typical STRIDE type threats to medical devices world.
Got it. So how widely is this template system going to be rolled out?
This template is actually available for everyone. We made sure that this is something that we can contribute to the community. It's not GE specific. We tried to make it very common, typical for medical devices, not just produced by GE. And we submitted it to Microsoft for them to add it to the widely available template library.
Nice. That's fantastic. I love it.
Yeah, and this is something we really hope to see popping up in lots of other industries as well. I mean, it's not just healthcare that has risks that tend to repeat across the industry. I'm sure if you look in finance or things that I can't even think of, I'm sure you would see lots of repeating security risks. And really, we're hoping that there will be a lot more of this, of people pooling their efforts together to identify the repeating security threats that apply to different industries.
Right, and similar to healthcare, I'm sure there's things like automotive pops into mind. Like that's kind of a newer risk that didn't, our cars didn't used to be, connected.
Yeah,
Right?
I mean, to be honest, we were actually inspired to do this by someone who did some work on an automotive threat modeling template.
Okay, so
It does exist, yeah.
It does exist. All right, cool.
Yep.
And that was just the first one that popped in my head when you said other industries, but I'm sure there's other specific cases that were not traditionally considered in threat models that are now becoming more, especially with IoT and things like that are becoming more connected, that, there's just attack surfaces that just didn't exist 10, 15 years ago.
Actually, the first customized template that I've seen, and that's what Jonathan said, it has inspired us to do our own, was the automotive template created by the NCC group in the UK, and it's also widely available for users. You can just Google it up and download it.
I will check that out.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I love it when people start extending things and making things publicly available and giving it back to the community. That's great. So, all right, great. Any last words you want to add about your talk?
Not particularly, but we hope to see some folks in Austin and meet people in person.
And listen to many questions. We hope to have those asked.
All right. Well, I'll come loaded with a few more questions for you, and I'll try to make sure a few others do too. So, all right. So thanks. So, we'll be speaking with Valery and Jonathan on Source Austin coming up on December 5th and 6th. And if you're interested in continuing the conversation with them there, please stop by the conference. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye bye.